everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Putting the Human Back, a new series devoted to exploring the many issues that have prospered amid the rise of rapid digitalization and automation in the workplace and in our everyday lives. My name is Christy McGuire, and I am the Vice President of Business Solutions here at Workplace Options. And today, I am here to talk to you about the power and importance of peer support and the integral role it plays in the fulfillment of human-centered care. You know, perhaps one of the most defining events of the past few years has been the swift and all-encompassing digital transformation that has reshaped both our work and private spheres. And with the integration of advanced technologies like AI and the rise of remote and hybrid work, the very ways in which we live, work, and communicate has been changed forever. Face-to-face meetings have become just that, nothing but faces staring back at each other on a screen. And that's if people bother to have a video call at all. Most often, people now opt to communicate through chat. They ping their coworkers, their HR department, their IT department. They connect with family and friends across social media more than they actually see them. And now, even for services like healthcare, customer support, legal and financial assistance, or emergency aid, and many are turning to, or rather being directed to, chat-based services such as live chat, and more often than not, chat bots. But while interventions like chatbots can be a great temporary solution to the overwhelming demand currently being placed on industries like health and mental health care, they are no substitute for the power of human connection. And yet, as workforces grapple with the isolation, loneliness, grief, trauma, and uncertainty brought on by the past few years, employers are increasingly turning to digital interventions like mental health chatbots and online apps for quick and easy solutions. But intimacy cannot be technologized, as asserts the multi-hyphenate founder of Organizational Wellness and Learning Systems, and today's special guest, Dr. Joel Bennett. And intimacy is ultimately one of the key ingredients essential to a healthy workforce and an effective employee health strategy. This recipe that Dr. Bennett has followed for decades through his work in training and promoting resilience coordinators and well-being ambassadors throughout workplaces across the US. With that said, joining me now to talk a bit more about the power of peer-to-peer support that he's witnessed and leveraged throughout his career is Dr. Bennett himself. Welcome, Doctor, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Christy. It's what a great introduction. I'm so excited that you have this new series. What's it called again? What is the actual name of the series again?
Putting the Human Back.
Yes. when did the human leave?
I think it left a while ago. We've got to bring the human back. And That's why you're here today, to help us know how to do that.
Yes, for everyone listening, I am a human being. Because you never know with AI, right? So yes. there's that as well, right? So Christy, can you confirm that yes, indeed, I am a human being, just so people listening don't have, yeah, okay, thank you.
You and I are both a human being, yes, thank you. And I know we do have to check that today. And I'm sure our audience is thinking of so many different questions they want to ask, especially when you say things like AI. But yeah, so this is such an exciting topic, and this topic could go so many different ways. But to start us off, I was actually wondering if perhaps you can tell me a bit more about the work that you do at OWLS. And can you talk a bit more especially about your Champions program and how it got started and really what it's achieved?
Wow, yes. So OWLS, Organizational Wellness and Learning Systems, OWLS, our tagline is we give a hoot. And that makes me both an owl and a human being. Anyway, our mission is, we talk about it in a sentence, we catalyze healthy work cultures from the inside out with science. That's the mission. And we've been around, I first started consulting with workplaces in 1990. And for a number of years was a research scientist at the Institute of Behavioral Research at Texas Christian University and worked on NIH grants and became very enamored with the use of evidence-based approaches to creating healthy work cultures, and developed, tested, and ran in clinical trials studies to enhance the work culture in order to reduce, and this was early on, employee substance misuse risk, increase their utilization of the employee assistance program, reduce stigma associated with that. So in a nutshell, I got very interested in that. And then subsequently, we OWLS received $6 million in NIH funding to continue to do that work, developing evidence-based technologies and testing them. And during that entire time, we began to consult because we saw that while we were able to establish effectiveness in research, it's a whole different thing when you move out of the lab into the real world. And so I had already been doing consulting because my training as a graduate student was in process consultation with the work of Edgar Schein, and learning also, I had also a clinical background and was very oriented in the human potential movement. So Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, Fritz Perls, and really being person-centered. So a lot of different threads there came together for me in recognizing that adults in the workplace are exposed to multidimensional forces that impact their well-being and their risk for addiction. And one of the programs we created, one of our original programs, was Team, TEAM, Awareness. And in that program, we trained employees, employees, on how to encourage a coworker to get help if you think that they are needing help for any kind of stressor or mental health. Now, while we focused on alcohol and drugs, we found that coworkers often know about another coworker's problems long before a supervisor does, and are actually in the best position to be able to say something if they know how to say what and they know what the resources are. So that's in fact what we did, and the results we got from those clinical trials were reduced problem drinking, reduced stress, reduced counterproductivity, increased help seeking, increased EAP utilization, and a whole variety of other factors, one of which was supervisor responsiveness to troubled workers. So all that to say is that laid the foundation. And the other major thread here that occurred during this 20-year experience was it's not necessarily the technology, the curriculum, the content that's important. It is. But even more importantly is managers and decision makers' willingness to take the time and give employees the time to connect with each other. So now we do that in other ways, and I can list off a whole variety of different programs. The other piece that came out of that was recognizing the importance of wellness committees, wellness champions, and peers. So I'll stop because I just said a whole lot, and but that's how the champion program got originally born.
You know, I love your terminology around team awareness, and I'm sure we could have a whole nother podcast on how the peer-to-peer connection affects the brain, and I know that's part of this conversation here. But how much, individuals can impact other individuals and help support them or help them learn how to get in the right direction. I think we look at the world today, not just in the US, but all around. We have global disruptions. obviously the horrible pandemic that we went through. There's major digital transformation across all kinds of industries and the way we work. But there's a lot of rising isolation, insecurity, doubt. We have disconnection, dysfunction, addictions are on the rise, violence and crime is on the rise, workplace violence is on the rise, but yet we just keep pumping into this digital world. And so I guess, how and why are well-being ambassador programs so integral to getting workers and their organizations as a whole back on track? And, when we look at these training programs, why should companies really look at implementing these first, then before turning to the digital solutions like mental health chatbots and AI and wellness apps?
I mean, there's so many reasons, we just talked about it. Let me just say that oftentimes in this space, and I'm sure you guys will come across this and talk a lot about it in this series, is this notion or concept of employee engagement. And I constantly hear from clients and people who are in HR, benefits, total rewards, and OD, organizational development, that their major problem is employee engagement. And what I always say, and I know this may seem a little bit like, oh, yeah, so the way you engage employees is by talking to them and engaging them in a conversation. You don't, and I think we have to recognize that one of the major problems is that the field of benefits and the way benefits are introduced and the way employees are educated on benefits, whether it's, insurance, total rewards, EAP, an app, wellness, whatever it is often coming from a top-down administrative logic. And, I would say there's some actuarial pressures, PEPM models, and I call all of that the benefits firewall. And people I've consulted with the International Foundation of Employee Benefits Plans. I've spoken to plan sponsors. Is that there isn't, to talk about putting the human back, right? Is these folks and the way HR people are educated are not oriented to the person. They're oriented to these administrative tabular tools. And when you sit down to try and talk to them about humble inquiry and person-centered work, their brains they haven't been cultivated that way. So number one. Number two, and these are trends, I think it's important. Beginning somewhat in the 70s or 80s, higher education started to receive a lot more funding through alumni for business schools. And you saw this incredible increase in MBA programs, buildings for business administration programs, and a gradual deterioration or lessening of emphasis on the liberal arts, on an interdisciplinary education. So now you have people in positions of leadership who are not thinking about the quote, the human experience. They're thinking about the bottom line. They're thinking about a top-down administrative approach. So when we say catalyze healthy work cultures from the inside out, we don't say catalyze healthy work cultures from the top down. We don't say catalyze healthy work cultures from the bottom up. I have so much to say about the use of it. Starts with the leadership, because that's actually a form of codependence. And what happens is, well, if our leaders did it, if they did it, why don't they do it? And that continues to keep the problem in place. It's not the people who need to do it are human beings, not the leaders, not the managers, but the human beings. So all that to say is that I wanted to give you a little bit of background in order to answer your question, because we're dealing with these forces that have grown. And on the top of all of that became the digital era, right? That the amazing amount of equity, investor money into building tools, digital tools, internet, smartphone tools, telehealth, digital mental health now. It's an amazing proliferation of funding that's not going into human potential. The funding isn't going into health media. It's going into digital techniques so of course, people are like, it's almost like people don't even see how blind they are because all these other cultural factors are swimming around. And it's a recipe for alienation, for all the things you listed.
I hate to ask you this question, but I feel like we need to touch on this topic just a bit around the science behind how the human brain reacts to a human connection, a peer-to-peer support conversation, a social interaction, versus how the human brain reacts to the gamification or a digital experience. Because again, when we talk about going back to the basics, things just seem to be getting worse. So how does that affect the brain? And then I think the second part of that is, getting companies to see that power within their own organization with their people has more impact on a person's outcome than a benefits app that somebody may or may not engage with.
Well, okay, so this is why every question will lead to a whole episode. So first, we have to make sure we understand what we mean by the word brain. And it's not just the brain we're talking about, it's the entire nervous system. And that's another thing. We have become brain-centric and not understanding the complexities of the human nervous system, the relationship between the cardiovascular system and the brain, the hormonal system, the neurohormonal system, a whole variety of neurochemicals and how they work in conjunction with the immune system and the muscular system and the autonomic nervous system. And so the point to say there is even there our language has gotten a little bit too heady. And so when we talk about human beings, we have to, and I use the Gurdjieff model, we are three brain beings: brain, heart, and body, right? Or I'll use the chakra systems. We have the 7 chakras from the Vedic literature, or we have the Chinese meridian systems. And so what you also see here, and I'll come back to your question about peers, is that we have to first recognize we limit ourselves by only talking about the brain. And the people who are in alternative health, who are using healing modalities with chakra work, meridians, Chinese medicine, Qigong, and acupuncture, acupressure, that is so important because there are known benefits. Research. In fact, we did have a grant from NIH to support the effectiveness of Qigong. So I just want to say, stop for a moment and just recognize, never use the word brain again, because you immediately cut off everything below the neck. Right? So I'll stop there and then I'll answer your question, but I wanted to see if you had a reaction to it.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's important to know.
But it's supported by Zoom. I mean, think about it. When we're on Zoom, we're not seeing the whole body,
True.
And what's fascinating is that, I always say, let's hold up our hands when we're talking to each other on Zoom and hold our palms up and look at each other, because, we have opposable thumbs for a reason. And all right. But to go back to the peer part, one of the most wonderful models that that helps us understand the impact of face-to-face interaction is Stephen Porges, Porges, and Deb Dana, Dana, other people in this field have called polyvagal theory, and the role of the vagus nerve. I'm not going to get into the details on this, but when we talk to somebody and we're looking at their face and we hear their tone of voice, stop. Looking at their face and hear their tone of voice, thousands of pieces of information are coming across. Eye movements, blinking of the eye, wrinkle in the face, wrinkle in the nose, tone of voice, pressure lowering, raising. There's no reason to create artificial intelligence robots that will mimic that. So polyvagal theory and the research we know about the vagus nerve and everything I just mentioned, plus the expressive system of the hands, right? The nodding. There's so much that's going on. It's an amazing plethora, a kaleidoscope, a mandala of information. And if we've ever fallen in love, we are picking up on that, So let's stop right there and say the workplace has, because of the things I mentioned earlier, has taken the human being out. Plus, our culture is afraid of intimacy. It's just, we're not like the French. We're not like other cultures. And I want to say that we have, you mentioned intimacy and people are going, what are you going to talk about? What do you mean? What do you mean by intimacy? And people will say to me, no, we can't talk about that. I will actually say, can we talk about intimacy? And they'll go, we can't talk about that on this show. I'm serious. So what you have to set the level a little bit higher to kind of like, okay, can we at least maybe go in this direction? So I'll stop there because there's so many other models to talk about. But what I want to say about peer, and the last thing, and we'll come back to this, is that we published a chapter just a few months ago in the Handbook of Occupational Psychology, and with Dr. Christina Banks, who I recommend you might have on. She's at Berkeley in the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces. And in that chapter, we made a distinction between what I think are 4 key roles that are relevant to the question. One is total worker health, and people who are moving more into being specialists in total worker health, which is a program out of the NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. 2, workplace wellness specialists, and there are certificates there as well. National Wellness Institute has one, and there are others. 3rd, which is, and we're moving further down to the employee experience here, is well-being champions, which you asked me about. And then the 4th are these peer support folks. And these are not just words and terms I'm making up. There's a whole body of literature specifically on mental health peer support. I just want to clarify that the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration developed core competencies for peer workers in behavioral health services. And the Mental Health Commission of Canada also published guidelines for peer support. And so when we talk about peer support, we're not just kind of throwing out a term. There's a whole set of competencies and research to support being able to train people to do an effective job. And that's a lot of what we do. And I could spend a lot of time talking about what those core competencies are, but I want everybody to know that I'm not just throwing out a term here, because of everything we talked about, there's a solution. Those 4 roles I just mentioned, not just training and development, not just organizational development, not just HR, any workplace, even a small workplace, can get training on how to bring the human back, and not in a systematic way. So I want to focus on the solution here, because we could talk about the problem. And every one of those roles require human interaction. They involve interaction face to face. The more you move from total worker health to the peer support. So I'll stop there because I know I just went on for a long time.
No, this is why we're having a series on this topic, because it has a lot of different legs to it. And so we're definitely going to be spending more time in upcoming podcasts talking about some of these points and spending time on each point specifically. You're so correct about the workforce today and the individuals coming into the workforce for generations to come. They really don't know how to have conversations. We are so behind technology today. I see it with my own kids, where they don't know what to write in a card to someone. They don't know how to write a thank you note. They don't know how to call up somebody on the phone and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this situation, or hey, I'm having a problem with you. Can we talk about it? It's all done through chat, and even we use ChatGPT to help us facilitate emails and conversations. And so I do think that it's interesting. The biggest talking points that most companies want is the demand for more holistic, personalized, and human-centered care. And these well-being ambassador programs is an excellent place to start, right? I mean, it's starting somewhere, it's building something out, and then getting people connected internally over time is what makes the biggest impact.
Yeah, yes. And it doesn't cost a lot. It's giving people the time for it. The other thing I should mention here, because we're doing sort of like this is sort of like a opening gambit, like a canvas, is the importance of employee resource groups. And a number of my clients have, mental health employee resource groups or resilience employee resource groups. So I want to throw that out as well, that it's not just at the individual competency level, it's creating opportunities for people to interact in groups. And that's a lot of what we do. Is it's not just delivering the program, but configuring it in a way that the people come together and interact with each other. And for example, right now we're doing we have a You Matter program. And whenever we do this, we bring employees from different departments together in an intentional way. And just last week, we finished one of our cohorts, and the employee said, "It was so great to see Alice. I haven't seen Alice in 3 years. We used to talk all the time, and now I'm able to get back together. We're going to go have lunch together." But if we hadn't done that, we hadn't brought them together, that wouldn't have happened. And so those are the moments that make employees experience being at the workplace in a positive, joyful way.
And wouldn't you agree that training is so powerful, because unfortunately people need support with those initiatives? I think there's a lot of things we need to learn around being better empathetic listeners and leaders, and knowing when somebody says something, how do we respond? How do we listen more? How do we recognize something that might be going on with a coworker and talk to them about it? I mean, there's so much that people are scared about. So these trainings can really help with those things.
Yes. It's like I said earlier, how do you engage employees? How do you get engagement? By engaging them in conversation. It's the most funniest thing. I will say, we do in almost every one of our programs really listening. We call it really listening exercises. And what I'll say is, it's not that difficult. If you give employees the time and you've cultivated a safe space, which we do in our work, they magically know how to listen with empathy. And often what happens is people start crying because they have been holding back. And now somebody's here who's listening to them. It's not that difficult to do. It's just creating the time. And again, I wrote a book called Time and Intimacy. And one of the points of that is that when you give people time and space, there's a greater chance for connection. And once you have greater connection, two things happen. Not only does your sense of time change, but you're more efficient in your use of time. So the most fascinating story, I tell this so many times, I was on a prevention advisory board for a company, large behavioral health company. And I had a chance to talk to medical directors, and I asked them, what's your biggest driver of medical costs? And they said stress. And I said, well, do you know there are evidence-based tools for reducing stress? And they said, well, we don't have the time. How crazy is that? That's just crazy. And so the point is that when you really give people a chance to come together and they have an intimate moment, 3 minutes seems like 10 seconds.
You develop a different connection. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's it. When we move from, you talk about the brain. So all we're talking about with computers now is brain to fingers to buttons. Right? I may as well be strapped into a chair, and like in the Matrix, and have a thing coming out of my spine, and I can live my whole life like that. So, human beings are not button beings. Okay. Everybody listening, you are not a button being, nor are you just a button in a chair with a button to do the buttoning. Okay. So right.
It's true, and it's causing a lot of health problems for people. So it's worse than smoking, they say today. So we're just yes.
And we're not just talking about carpal tunnel syndrome, right?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
So the point is that's what we like to do, is we like to talk about the problem and all the problems. I will tell you on LinkedIn, everybody, whenever you see somebody talking about the mental health crisis, there's a negativity bias. We perpetuate the negative media because all of these statistics that come out. The media is not a human being. It is a media. It is a medium, okay? It means it's standing in between us. Do not let the media take over your brain, because every time you see that, go back to those mother truckers and say, well, I see you've talked about the problem. Can you also talk about the solution? Or find some article that talks about the solution. So we continue to perpetuate that negativity, which has gotten taken over. I mean, it's just, let's not talk about politics here, please.
I know, and that could be a whole nother podcast in itself. Yes, that is definitely very spot on. And unfortunately, a lot of what people are experiencing. Gosh, I do have one more question for you, because I know we're coming up on time. So, we talked about this in our conversation before about humans don't work like a business outcome. And I know a lot of employers listening might be hesitant to invest in a well-being ambassador program. And instead, they want to turn to solutions like chatbots, benefit apps, online coaching sessions, because they think it's easy to get an ROI on those things, and they can go to their C-suite and really showcase what that looks like to the company's bottom line. But when it comes to tracking employee well-being, as you said, employers can't always rely on the numbers. So how can companies look at a well-being ambassador program and really demonstrate the ROI that it can bring to the table?
Okay. So, two things. First, if you're listening to this and you're already thinking like that, and you're like, what is this guy trying to sell? Or, how am I going to do this? You first have to confront your own addiction to control. Okay. You are a control freak. If you're listening to this and you're only concerned about ROI, you have been bred by a culture that's turned you into a machine. Hello, I am talking to you. You are a control freak. You are addicted to control. go ahead and see a therapist and work that out. That's the first thing, okay? Second, you're going to say to me, well, it's not me, it's my CFO. Please have your CFO call me, and I will talk to your CFO, and we'll have a very wonderful coaching session. And I will really listen to probably him. I will really listen and help them figure out the relationship between the investments that they're making, their margins, how much they're spending on these vendors, how vendor dependent they have become, and how they're neglecting their magic sauce, which is their own employees. So you have to first recognize that when you're dealing with actuarial tables and spreadsheets and per employee per month or per employee years, you're already stuck in the everything above the neck. And CFOs are trained to think only above the neck. So I want to stop right there, is that the whole ROI thing is a crazy paradigm because it's already you're never going to get out of it. It's like you can only see, Einstein said you cannot solve a problem at the level that it was created. So this whole ROI argument, I always sidestep because it's not about, in fact, we now have a lot on value on investment. And the research on the triple bottom line, all the research on social capital and social investment, and B corporations, there's enough out there to show us that companies do so much better when they have that human capital. And I don't like that phrase, but when they invest in not just their employees but their communities, in their ecological footprint. I mean, it's just, there's enough out there. So it's this myopic way of looking at the world, and the pressure that we are put under to think, well, it's just about the money. And employees, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I talk to in wellness who go, I don't know what I'm doing here, because all they want me to do is, just to make sure we sell enough stress balls, And so the shift to culture is because they haven't been educated. They haven't invested the time to be educated. And there's so much out there. Our work, and I can send you all the research we've done, shows that when you take the time to move beyond an app, and you give employees the time to interact with each other and get to know each other and feel supported by each other, you're not only helping the employees' individual well-being, you're also improving the work climate. And when you improve the work climate, you improve productivity. So the other thing that's happened is that the whole wellness field has gotten what we call individuocentric. It's the way that team awareness. And that's the PEP. It's like you only can see what you can see because you're focusing on the employee. You're not focusing on the climate. You're not focusing on the connections. So once you change the climate beyond just the individual, you have a more lasting and enduring effect. So it's not just about the next 3 quarters. It's about the next 2 years. And that's the other part of this. And I could go through all the research on supervisor, manager, executive timeframes and how far out they're thinking. And so those who tend to think from the longer term perspective often have an eye on the human capital. And they're not just thinking about struggling to get to the next quarter. So there's a lot in there, but I would say once you start doing that, it's a no-brainer.
And, I think that, and we've talked about this, if there is an organization that believes in this mission and is really looking to start somewhere, there are essential steps that you do suggest to go through to really create the best ambassador or peer-to-peer team awareness solution within the company, right? I mean, anywhere from starting with data, collecting assessments to the end. And again, this might be for another podcast, but do you want to just highlight if somebody's listening and they're saying, this sounds amazing, I'm on board, where do I start and what are the right steps to get this moving?
Yeah, okay. And we'll go quickly, but I do hope I can come back because
yes.
Sort of like this interview is more like the problem and framing, whereas the actual details on the solution is a whole, we've kind of hinted at it. So the first step, and I say the most important step, is to move from the programmatic perspective, thinking about vendors and programs and initiatives, to what's called a capacity building approach. So you're not looking at how can we deliver this program here and there. You do want to do that, but the eye is on the longer term capacity building and empowering employee voice through that process. The way you do that is through stakeholder interviews that are inclusive and diverse, making sure you've got all the stakeholders inside and outside the organization, employee focus groups, and surveys. The caveat is if you do that without having the long-term commitment to giving feedback and showing everyone that you listen to them and that you now are taking steps, number one, it's going to hurt you. Do never, ever, ever do a survey that you don't plan on acting on, ever. Number one. Number two, as you're doing long-term capacity building, you're using things like Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, Edgar Schein and Peter Schein's humble inquiry. There's a number of different tools out there. Gracious space. There's so many ways of incorporating organizational development and listening technologies. There's all kinds of Harrison Owen open space. These are all, future search. There's so many different tools out there, but you're using them with that longer term perspective. The second part is then you go back and you come back, hey, we heard you. How would you like to help run the committee? How would you like to help run the ERG? And you're gradually, incrementally, over a long period of time, building capacity. And you have to have leadership. I know top down isn't necessarily, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but if you don't engage people and say, I am going to give you $5,000 for a company picnic, or I am going to give you you have to do that because then they really believe that you're not just an ad hoc, shot in the dark group. So capacity building does involve budget, but the budget is almost like a way to reinforce. You're reinforcing rather than dangling a carrot. You have to be very careful. So I say, stop focusing so much on vendors and programmatic tools. Focus on human-centered capacity building and take a longer-term approach. So there's a lot more to it, but that's the first step. That's
excellent information. And we will definitely spend another podcast going through those steps because I think people need to hear. Again, it can be overwhelming. Where do I start? And doing it the right way is definitely key. Before we end today's podcast, you have some amazing books. Can you reference whatever books you feel our audience should know about and where they can obtain them?
Okay, yes. So the first thing I want to say, everything I said requires being present. So I say self-care depends upon self-worth. Self-worth depends upon being present to your life. And being present to your life often depends on having support from others over time. Presence is what allows you to expand time and makes you less a victim to clock time. So we have our Quest for Presence collection of books. We have our presencequest.life website. The first book you can download for free there is The Connoisseur of Time. I see that as the basis for everything, because without presence, you're just a brain with finger buttons.
With no body.
That's right. The other book we have is our Wellbeing Champions Guidebook, a competency-based approach. So if you're looking to start learning about a competency-based approach to educating your champions or ambassadors, there's that. Then there are two other books that are for people who want to take that longer view perspective at the leadership level or managerial level. And that is Heart-Centered Leadership, Lead Well, Live Well, with my co-author, Susan Steinbrecher. We just sold 10,000 copies to a multinational organization. And then Best Self at Work with Ben Dilla, which is about emotional intelligence strengths. Ben is a Clifton strengths coach. So we integrate the utilization of a strengths-based approach with resilience. And there's more, but those are some tools, and our Raw Coping Power book for resilience. And that's the point of these. It's not like we built these books to use it it's not the approach. It's not the tool. It's just a device, but people purchase them. Somebody just bought 100 copies of Wellbeing Champions because it starts the process. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of like, we are willing to start this. Let's have this conversation. And they're cheap.
They are, and they're quick reads. And you know what? Knowledge is power. It just is the way it is. You have to start somewhere. You have to educate yourself. So, gosh, Dr. Bennett, you are a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for joining us today. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. There is more to come on this podcast series. Please tune in for future series. And thank you. And everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.